project with my Rails and JavaScript application and movement mixer. This application allows clients and their personal trainers to design workout routines together. So as the client, Jenna, I'm going to design a workout routine. The title of my routine is Ballet Workout. It has a beginner difficulty level. It will take about 15 minutes to perform. The first exercise movement is a plie. Stand with your heels glued together and toes turned outward and apart. Bend your knees and lower yourself. Return to the starting position. I'll perform 3 sets of 8 reps, and I can click this Add Exercise button to render form fields via JavaScript to add a new exercise to my workout routine. I will perform a releve. And the technique for performing releve: maintaining good posture, stand on your tiptoes, slowly lower your heels to the ground, creating your own resistance. And I'll perform 3 sets of 8 reps again. I can now specify the equipment I need to perform this workout: a ballet bar, and I only need one. And this workout routine will target my calves, legs, and this workout routine will implement the bar training type. So one of the requirements of this project was to render a form for creating a resource with my Rails application, and this form should be submitted dynamically through JavaScript. So when I click the Create Routine button as a client, I'm submitting the form to create a new workout routine, and I prevent the default submit action of which would be to send a normal HTTP post request to /routines, and instead the form data is serialized and it's sent via an AJAX post request to the endpoint of /routines using the jQuery post method. And this endpoint of /routines maps to the create action in my routines controller. So in the create action, if a valid routine is created and saved to the database, it will render a JSON object representation of the newly created routine. And it's worth noting that I'll get a successful status code of 201, indicating that a routine resource was successfully created. And back in my routines.js JavaScript file, routine.createListener, which hijacked the form submission, now delegates to routine.create, which basically stores a function that accepts the successful JSON response, the JSON object representation of the routine that was just created, as its parameter. And in the function routine.create, I first create a new routine object by calling new and passing the routine object parameter, the successful JSON response, to the routine constructor function. And then once I have my new routine object, I can call a prototype method called format and present preview on this new routine object. And the goal of this prototype method is to format the HTML that will be used when I want to display the routine on the page. So just to give a little backstory, to help me display the routine, I had created a handlebars template inside of the script with an ID of routine template. And the string HTML template code found inside of the script is compiled along with the variables found between the handlebars delimiters in this template as part of a function that I can invoke with the new routine object as its context. So calling the prototype method format and present preview on my new routine object actually invokes the handlebars template function routine.routine_template function, where this is the new routine object on which I'm calling the prototype method. And the main point is that because the variables between the handlebars delimiters in the template have the same exact names as the keys in the new routine object, I can actually use the values corresponding to those keys in the new routine object to replace the variables in the template. So the resulting HTML for the new routine, which is the HTML template source code with values injected from the routine I'm trying to display, becomes the inner HTML in this div with an ID of preview routine. So I've basically, I've gotten back a JSON response and I've formatted it using handlebars, and my prototype method helps me append that preview of the routine to the DOM. So another requirement of this project was to render at least one index page via JavaScript and an active model serialization JSON backend. So as you can see, there is a link to preview the workout routines of a client. And when clicked, I can see that I have designed 2 workout routines. This is the workout routine I just designed. So the way this works, in users.js JavaScript file, I basically defined an arrow function called load belongs to declare, which handles loading the workout routines that belong to a client, as seen here, or to load the training guides that belong to a trainer on that user's show page. So once again, I'm rendering the index of workout routines that belong to the client on this client's show page, or the training guides that belong to the trainer on the trainer show page. So let's just see that again. If the client design workout routines, as I did here, there's a link, and this link has a class of load user routines. And upon clicking this link with a class of load user routines, I'm sending an AJAX GET request to the route users/id.json, which is actually the href attribute value of the link. And I can retrieve the workouts belonging to this user, myself, by sending an AJAX GET request to what is seemingly a user's show page URL, because I actually included the macro has many routines in my user serializer. And the successful JSON response I get back from my AJAX GET request to /users/id.json is a JSON object representation of the user instance whose routines I want to view and whose show page I'm currently on. And it's important to note that nested inside of this JSON user object response, I have an array of routine objects representing the routines that belong to the user, in this case, the routines that belong to me, the user with ID 4. So what happens how I'm trying to explain how I basically render these routines on the page. In user.loadUserRoutines function, I iterate through the array of routine objects, and for each routine object in the array, I create a new routine object using my constructor function and the new method that will be used as the context passed to my handlebars template that basically returns the HTML to display that specific routine. And it's the same HTML, it's the same template that I used to create a routine in the first place. And the HTML template with values injected from each new routine object, replacing the variables between the handlebars delimiters, is then appended to the page inside of this div with an ID of belongs to user. So the div with an ID of belongs to user will soon contain all of the workout routines that I, the client, have designed. Another requirement of this project is to render a show page via JavaScript and an active model serialization JSON backend. So when I click the link to view exercise guide in the navigation, I have here an index of exercise movements. And if I click on plie, I essentially allow a user to peruse exercise movements by clicking the next or previous buttons on this movement show page. So just to demonstrate, I can go to the next exercise, next one, etc. So it's important to note that the way I did this was to define 2 custom routes in my routing file. And the first route is get movements ID next, which maps to the next action in the movements controller. And the other route is get movements ID previous, which would map to the previous action in the movements controller. So let's just use the example of the next exercise. When the user clicks the button to view the next exercise, I call fetch, passing in the URL endpoint of /movements ID next. And as I said before, this route maps to the next action in movements controller. So going into the movements controller, I remember that due to the before action set movement private method, set movement private method will be called before movements next. And in set movement, I use the ID route variable from the URL that I sent in the fetch call to find the current @movement instance that I'm viewing. And in the next action, I then call the next instance method on my movement instance that I'm currently viewing. And the instance method next called on the movement instance will return the first instance in the collection of movements whose IDs are greater than that of the current at movement instance's ID. And if none exists, I instead return the first movement stored in the database as the next movement so that I can sort of get this cyclical pattern. So movements.next will render a JSON representation of the next movement. And in the JavaScript function, I'm going back to the JavaScript function movement.showNext or previous listener where I actually sent that fetch call. The fetch call will return a promise, and I have to resolve this promise. And the way I do that is I tack on a call to then and pass in a callback arrow function in which I get back my response through implicit returns. So as I said, the call to fetch returns a promise. I resolve this promise by tacking on a call to then, which accepts an arrow function, and it's within this arrow function that I can access the response. But I want to convert that response to JSON. So hence, I have to call then, passing in the response as the parameter to the arrow function, passing in the arrow function, which response is a parameter rather, and then I call response.json and use implicit returns to get back the JSON response. However, instead of getting back the response, another promise is returned from this, and I have to resolve this promise by tacking on another call to then. And in the second call to then, that's where I can finally access the JSON object representation of the next movement. And in my second call to then, I pass in movement.show, which stores a function whose parameter movement object is the JSON object representation of the next movement to view. So once again, like the other situations, I created a handlebars template to show the next or previous movement, and it's found inside of a script with an ID of show movement template. And the way this works is that in the function movement.compile show movement template, I get the HTML string template inside of the script with an ID of show movement template. I compile the string template source code along with the variables found between the delimiters as part of a function, which I then invoke with a context object. And in this case, the context object will be the new movement that I create from the movement constructor function. So in movement show, I create the new movement by calling new, passing in the JSON object representation of the next movement to movement constructor function. I call format show prototype method on the new movement object. And when it is called, this prototype method actually invokes the movement.showMovement template function, this, passing in the new movement object, which is referred to as this, as its argument. And as before, the names of the variables between my handlebars delimiters in show movement template have the same names as the keys in the new movement object. So when format show invokes my handlebars template function, I can inject the values corresponding to the keys in the new movement object to replace the variables within the handlebars delimiters that have the same name. So the HTML template with values injected from the new movement object becomes the inner HTML inside this div class of container. So when I go to the next exercise, the div with a class of container gets new HTML content within it to represent the next exercise movement. So another requirement of this project is to dynamically render on the page a has-many relationship through JSON using JavaScript. And the way I did this, so as a trainer, if I log out, I can log in as a fitness trainer, Tracy. And trainer Tracy can go to view exercise. She can go to view the exercise guide, the index of exercise movements, and I can click on an exercise movement. So I will click on the bicep curl. And as a trainer, Tracy can create a training guide, which consists of training tips on how to properly perform an exercise movement. So the trainers will, on the movement show page, trainers will view a training guide. And I can go to the next movement and I can see here's the training guide to perform a tricep extension, or rather the form to create the training tips for performing a tricep extension, and I can add training tips to properly perform a plie, go to the next exercise and add training tips to perform a releve. So as the trainer, I decide I want to add training tips for performing a tricep extension. So train your clients to use proper form when performing this exercise. Add training tips to achieve proper form. Okay, so don't lock your elbows. Your arms should be perfectly framing your head. And train your clients to use proper breathing techniques. Add a training tip to implement effective breathing patterns. So I would say to inhale as you dip the weights behind your head, and exhale as you push the weights up. How can you modify this exercise? Only use one weight as opposed to two. And how can you make this exercise more challenging? Add pulses between sets. So I can now publish this training guide, and I will see it appears here. Training guide for tricep extension, a series of training tips from personal trainer Tracy. Use proper form, don't lock your elbows, your arms should be perfectly framing your head. Practice effective breathing patterns. Inhale as you dip the weights behind your head, and exhale as you push the weights upward. Feeling overexerted? Modify the movement. Use only one weight. Feeling energetic? Take things up a notch with this challenge. Add pulses between sets. So just to summarize what's going on here, each exercise movement has many training guides. So I render guides belonging to the movement on that movement's show page. So what I can see is I can log out as the trainer, log back in as the client. And if I go to view exercise guide and I click on tricep extension, I see there's one training guide available for use, and I click the link and I see the training guide that was just created. So each exercise movement has many training guides, so I'm rendering the guides belonging to that movement on the movement show page. So as I saw, if a guide has movements that belong to it, as opposed to no guides at all, there's a link to view training guides. And this link has a class of movement-guides on the movement show page here. And in my JavaScript, I have a function that's stored in guide.indexHandler. And when this link is clicked, what happens is I'm sending an AJAX GET request via the jQuery GET method to /movements/ID/guides, and this endpoint maps to the index action in my guides controller. And in guides index, I'm rendering a JSON representation of all guides belonging to the specific movement, which is, this is an array of guide objects. And then the guide.indexHandler delegates to guide.index, and the function stored here accepts the guide's array of guide objects as its parameter. And at this point, I can iterate over the array of guide objects using the for each iterator, and for each guide object, I do a couple things. I first create a new guide object. I pass in the guide object to the guide constructor function using new to create a new guide stored in the new guide variable. I call the prototype method format show on this guide object, and I append the resulting HTML for that guide, which is basically a handlebars template, a guide handlebars template with the values injected from the guide object. I append the resulting HTML template with the values injected from the guide object into the div with an ID of training guides, which is here. So if there were multiple guides, you would see a series of guides displayed within this div. Now, let's go back. If I go to my profile as a trainer, Tracy, instead of viewing the workout routines by the client, I'm viewing training guides by Tracy the trainer. And I can see the training pointers that I've created for plie, for tricep extension. As a trainer, I can also manage target areas. I can click the link to view workout target areas, which will render the index of workout target areas through JavaScript and my JSON backend. And I can add a workout target area, submit this form with an Ajax post request. So if I wanted to add a target area of, let's see, let's say I want to add the workout target area of toes, because I'm on my toes a lot, or clients that are practicing ballet workouts are on their toes a lot. So I create a target area and I get this message: you successfully created a new target area. Clients can now design workout routines that focus on sculpting and strengthening one's toes. And the same goes for training types. I can view all training types, and this is rendered through JavaScript and JSON. And I can add a training type like ballet. And I successfully created a new fitness training type. Clients can now design ballet workout routines. I can remove, training types from the list. You successfully deleted a training type. Workout routines will no longer employ the ballet training type. I can remove a target area. And I successfully deleted a target area. Workout routines will no longer target one's toes. So as you can see, there are a series of features that I have developed that will employ JavaScript and an active model serialization JSON backend. And I hope you enjoyed my project. Thank you so much for listening.